Kerry Egan is a hospice chaplain, educated at Harvard Divinity School, the author of On Living and Fumbling, A Journey of Love, Adventure, and Renewal on the Camino de Santiago, and an alumna of CPE. When she began her work as a hospice chaplain, Kerry realized she'd been granted an invaluable chance to witness firsthand what she calls the spiritual work of dying, the work of finding or making meaning of one's life. In her time spent in hospices, Egan has listened to patients reflect with feelings of pride, regret, and hope on the journey of living. These are the stories she recalls in On Living, her moving new book that is equally philosophical as it is accessible. Egan regularly shares the remarkable insights she has gained from her work as a hospice chaplain through her writing and programs. A gifted and uplifting speaker, Egan helps audiences reconsider how we live and what is most important in life. A former writer in residence at Aspen Institute's Aspen Words program, Egan has been featured on PBS NewsHour and CNN's Morning Edition, and has written essays for CNN.com, The Washington Post, Oprah.com, Woman's Day, Parents, American Baby, and Reader's Digest, which have been read over 2 million times. Egan is a graduate of Washington and Lee University and Harvard Divinity School. She lives with her family in Columbia, South Carolina. Please join me in welcoming Kerry Egan.
Well, first, I want to say congratulations to everybody who got certified tonight. That's a remarkable accomplishment. It's not one I think I could ever do, so I'm very impressed, and my deepest congratulations to you. I want to say thank you to all of you for having me here. This is an honor. It's also a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be around other chaplains. In the past 2 years since the book came out, I've talked to lots of different groups, and it's nice to be among people who feel like your own people. So thank you for having me. When I wrote On Living, I was having a lot of trouble. I was having a lot of trouble writing it because I'm a mother, and it just wasn't getting written. My editor said to me, listen, there's this, it sounds very impressive, Kerry Egan went to the Aspen Institute, but I'm going to tell you the truth of Kerry Egan going to the Aspen Institute, which was they didn't really want me. They actually had a very famous person who was coming, a famous poet, and the poet canceled 2 weeks before they were supposed to go. And so my editor said, could you drop everything and go to Colorado for a month? And I said, yes, because I had no other choice. I had to get this book written. So it's this sort of very prestigious residency. It's very literary people. It's poets. It's novelists. It is not hospice chaplains. But I go out there and I write the book, and I actually wrote almost all of it. I wrote almost all of it in that 1 month because I had that solitude. And at the end of the month, I had to present a little bit of what I'd written to people in the community. It went over pretty well. And then the people who ran the residency took me out to dinner. We went to a Mexican restaurant. And we had some margaritas. And the truth came out, as happens when you have some margaritas. And they said, we have to tell you, when we found out the poet canceled and a hospice chaplain was coming, we were kind of freaked out. And I said, And they said, yeah, we didn't know what to expect. We thought you were just going to want to talk about God and death all the time. And they said, yeah, we thought you were going to be a real weirdo, but you're kind of nice. Like, you're nice to be with. You're kind of funny, and you're pretty normal. And I said, So thank you for having me and not thinking I'm a weirdo, because I like to talk to people who are dying. So I'm going to start with a story about how On Living came to be, right? How this little book came to be. It started because a reflection I wrote for a memorial service. In hospice, you have a memorial service once a year for the people who died in your care. And so it was my turn to write the reflection for that. And my friend Trisha, who worked at CNN, she's an old college friend, said, hey, do you have anything we could print on CNN? We're starting this new religion vertical. And I said, all I can give you is this reflection. I was working as a hospice chaplain. I had 2 very little children at the time. I said that, and she said, okay, we'll run it. And it really touched a nerve for people. I think it was different than what people had read before about what people who are dying want to talk about. And so a few weeks after it ran, I get a phone call. I'm making lunches, literally making lunches in the morning with my kids, getting ready for school. Phone rings, pick it up, and a woman says, hi, I'm Martha, and I'm a producer at PBS, and I read your essay about hospice chaplaincy, and I don't really know anything about it, and we've never covered it on Religion and Ethics News Weekly, and I'm just calling to see, do you have like 5 minutes? I just want to even see if there's a story there. We don't even know anything about it, right? And I said, yeah, sure. I've got 5 minutes because I got to get the kids to school. She goes, okay. She asked some questions. I answer them to the best of my ability. And then she says, Kerry, I got to tell you, I think you're fantastic. I think you're just great. I think you're fantastic. And I fell for this immediately. She didn't even have to repeat it. I said, oh, Martha, thank you. Thank you so much. She goes, listen, Kerry, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to come up there with a film crew, and I'm going to follow you around as you visit your hospice patients, and we're going to do a television special on it. And I said, no, whoa, no. And I realized I'd fallen for it. And she says, why not? And I said, I can think of 10 reasons off the top of my head. She goes, what are they? I said, number 1, HIPAA. She goes, people can sign releases. I said, number 2, my boss will never go for it. She goes, you haven't even asked your boss. We go down the list. She's got an answer for everything like that. And then I say, none of my patients want to be on TV. She goes, how do you know? You haven't asked them. And I said, that's just it, Martha. I never will. And she said, why not? And I said, because that's not a fair question, right? I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here, right? You all know this. That's not a fair question, right? You can't ask, do you want to be on TV? I said, there's such a power imbalance, right, between the chaplain and the patient. If I ask that, they're going to think I want the answer to be yes, and they might feel compelled to say yes. I said, no, I'm not even going to ask. She goes, you wouldn't even, not even, I said, no. I said, listen to me. Unless somebody says, I have a spiritual need to be on television as I'm dying, it's not going to happen, Martha. She goes, all right, just give me your boss's name and number. I'll start there. And I was like, ah. So just to get off the phone, I kind of threw Sandy under the bus, gave her the number. So I go into the office, 15 minutes later, and Sandy says, talk to your friend Martha. And I said, Sandy, I'm sorry, I didn't know what to do. And she goes, no, don't worry about it. But listen, you have a new patient this morning, and I'm wondering, can you just rearrange your day, cancel whatever you need to, because he says he has a spiritual emergency. He really needs to see you today. And that's pretty unusual in hospice, right? In hospitals, there's more spiritual emergencies, terrible diagnoses, someone comes in the emergency room. Hospice, that tends to be far less frequent, and especially someone who needs to see me that morning. And I said, okay, yeah, sure. So I go to the house. I show up at Jim's house, Jim Burgo, and we sit down to talk, and he says, listen, I have a really close relationship with the Holy Spirit, and I have my whole life. And I know what it feels like when the Holy Spirit has a job for me to do. And the Holy Spirit has a job for me to do. And I said, okay. And he goes, and I don't know how to do it. I said, all right. And he said, I have to get a message out to thousands of people. And I can't even get out of my chair. How do I get a message out to thousands of people when I can't even get out of this recliner? And I said, do you want to be on TV? And he says, "You can do that?" And I said, "I can do it today." I couldn't do it yesterday, but I can do that today. So sure enough, this film crew comes up from DC, and I sort of had thought it would be, I tried to prep Jim and Elaine for this, and I thought it would be sort of like someone with a camcorder, but it wasn't. It was 5 people. There's like a lighting guy, like a big, like a movie camera. And there's a big camera, and they've got a sound guy, and a producer, and an interviewer. And this whole entourage, we show up at Jim and Elaine's house, knock on the door. Elaine opens, and she says, "Oh my God, you didn't get my message?" And I said, "No, what happened?" She said, "We can't do it. He had an episode this morning. He was dying of liver cancer, and sometimes when people are dying of liver cancer, they have these periodic episodes where their ammonia levels just shoot up. And there's no controlling it. There's no telling when it's going to happen. And it makes people exhausted, right? They're not capable of, they can't really control themselves while it's happening, and afterwards, they're exhausted." And she said, "He can't do it." And I said, "Okay, then we won't do it." Martha's right behind me, and she goes, "What? What?" I said, "No, Martha, if we can't do it, we can't do it, right?" And then we hear a voice from inside the house, and it's Jim. And he's going, "Let them in! Let them in!" And so in we go, and we're going to film. Now, Jim had told me that he had a message from the Holy Spirit. But I didn't really know what the message was, right? We talked for a long time. Long time, lots of visits, weekly visits for a good 6 weeks, long visits. So he says, so I knew he had a message, but I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but I trusted he would get it out. And now all of a sudden, he's had an episode, right? He can't even lift his head. He can't lift his head from his chest. And he's freezing. He's under about 7 blankets. He's got 2 hats on. He's very cold, very, very weak, can barely speak. We've got to get the message out, right? And I don't even know what the message is. So we do the visit, and quite frankly, it wasn't a very good spiritual care visit. It wasn't very good at all. I asked all sorts of leading questions. I brought up all sorts of things that I thought might be the message. It was bad. It was not good. And I never figured out what it was. Filming ended, and off we went. So the next day, I go back to Jim and Elaine just to sort of see how this went. What did they think of the whole experience? And Jim was better. He was so much better, right? He hadn't had an episode that morning. He was back to his old self. And I said, how did you feel about yesterday? And he said, "Good, good." I said, "How'd you think it went?" He said, "Good, really good." I said, "Good. Do you feel like you got the message out?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, definitely got the message out, definitely." I said, "Good, good." What was the message, right? What was it? What was the message? And he looked at me with so much surprise, and he said, You were the message. You and Erica, the nurse, and Elaine, my wife, and Patty, the aide, all of you were the message. He said the message was that there are people in this world who love you enough that they will come and they will take care of you, and they will talk to you, even when they don't know you, and even when you're dying, and that your wife, who you always took care of, she'll take care of you, even if you're so weak, even if he was Portuguese, right? It was very sort of machismo culture, and this was very hard for him to be so weak. He said, and your wife can still love you, even when you're so sick. He said, the message is that the love is stronger than the sickness. The love is stronger than the dying. That's the message. And so he was on TV, but he never got to see it. He died about 2 weeks later before it went on. But it's still out there. You can still go look it up. Last fall, so this was about 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Last fall, I got a message on Facebook, of all places, a comment from Elaine Burgo. And it had to be her, right? I mean, it's a pretty unusual name. By the way, these are their real names because the story continues. And it just said, it was like on my professional, I have a professional page now. It's kind of a weird thing to have a professional page. I have a professional public page. And it just said, I feel very lucky to have met Kerry. And of course, I was so happy. I was so excited to get this message, to see Elaine, you know? And I right away, I sent her a message back and I said, I'm so happy to see your name and your picture, and if you want to be in touch with me, I would love that, but I understand if that's not really what you want, you know, but I just want you to know that you're special to me too, you know. And she wrote back, and she said yes, she did want to be in touch. So I called her the next day, and we're talking on the phone. I'm driving my minivan, because I live in South Carolina. You can do that in South Carolina. There's no law against that. Everywhere else, it's against the law, not Kakalaki, right? So I'm driving along, talking to Elaine. We're reconnected, we're having a great time, and we're talking about how this crazy experience, right, that Jim, you know, 10 days before he died, had this film crew show up at his house, and she said, you know, I just don't know why he ever insisted on doing that. It was so, so out of character for him. And I said, well, remember, I'm driving. Well, you know, he had to get the message out. And she goes, what message? And I said, oh, so I'm like, I better pull over. I need to pull over and think about this. And I said, he had a message. He had a message from the Holy Spirit that he had to get out, and that's why he did it. And she said, I didn't know that. She said, what was the message? And I said, the message was you. The message was you. He wanted people to know that you still loved him, even though he was sick, and he wanted the world to see that your love was going to transcend death, right? That just because he was dying didn't mean that love was going to end. That was the message from the Holy Spirit. And she started to cry a little bit. And then she said, you know, Kerry, Jim talked to you so much at the end. He told you so much, and I don't resent that, right? He had a lot to get off his chest, and he did. He had a very troubled life. She said, I don't resent that. But he didn't talk to me at the end. He didn't talk to me. And I really wish he had. I really wish he had told me that. I really wish he had told me that the love was going to survive his death, because I didn't know that for a long time. For years, I didn't know that. And I wish he had told me the message from the Holy Spirit. I wish he had talked to me. So this is an aside. It's not part of the speech. And as a writer, because I'm a writer and I'm a chaplain, I totally shouldn't stick this in here, but I love it so much I'm going to. So hold that thought, and then we're going to go right back to it, because this is so great. And I'm not even making this up. I'm not exaggerating even the littlest bit. The next day, after I talked to Elaine Burgo, after 6 years, and she says, I wish people knew that. I wish people knew that they need to tell each other that, right? I get an email from a woman named Rosemary. And she says, hi, I'm Rosemary Smith. It's not her. I can't remember her last name is. I'm Rosemary whatever. She goes, I'm the Pope's editor at Loyola Press. The Pope has an editor. Who knew, right? Could you imagine being the Pope's editor? And she says, the Pope is writing a new book, and Francis and I were like friends now. Francis is writing a new book, and he's writing a book about wisdom from people at the end of life. And I read your book, and I liked it, and I was just wondering, do you have any stories you could share? You know, do you have a story that maybe someone wants to share in the Pope's book? And Jim and Elaine were very Catholic, very devout Catholics. And I said, yes, I do today. I do today. And I called up Elaine and I said, hey, do you want to be in the Pope's new book? And she's like, oh my God, of course I want to be in the Pope's new book. It was kind of awesome because I felt really guilty that Jim and Elaine's story didn't make it into On Living because it didn't fit. My editor cut it. I wrote it. It got cut, legitimately so. It didn't fit with the structure and the theme of the book, which really, if you think about it, if you've read it, it's really sort of about traumatic experiences. And I felt really guilty about that, right? Because you got to get the message out, right? There's a message. We got to get the message out. And I felt like, I didn't get the message out. But you know what? It's going to get out to a heck of a lot more people than it would have in my book, right? It's going to be That's going to be translated into 37 languages. It's going to be like the distribution. So it's kind of an awesome story. All right, so go back to where I was. Isn't that kind of great, Jim and Elaine, and their messages? It's pretty great. I really loved them. So we don't do a good job, right? Even when the hospice chaplain is there, even when you're really working pretty closely with the hospice chaplain, we don't always do a good job as a culture talking about, well, death and God, right? I mean, think about those women in Colorado. Those are really educated women, Aspen Institute, and they were kind of upset and nervous about the idea of having to deal with someone who deals in death and God, in sickness and the Holy Spirit, right? That's an uncomfortable place for a lot of people in our culture. And our culture generally, we haven't been doing a good job of it. And so into the breach, because there's a breach in how we talk about this culturally, have come doctors. Somebody said to me, and it struck me so odd until I thought about it, somebody actually said to me, yours is my favorite of all the death books. And I said, I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you know, Atolga One Day, Being Mortal, Paul Kalanithi, When Breath Becomes Air, Jessica Zitter, Extreme Measures. We can go on and on. The vast majority of those books are written by physicians. There has been a breach culturally in how we talk about the meaning of sickness and death. And so doctors have rushed in. The other group that have talked about meaning-making and meaning and sickness and end of life are what I sort of call pop spirituality, you know? And some of these are writers, are beautiful writers. I love reading Jen Hatmaker, right? I love her blog posts. I love Atolga One Day. But the fact is that physicians are writing about death and dying from a medical model. And having worked in hospice for years and years, I'm extremely keenly aware of the difference between the medical model of understanding sickness and death and the hospice model, and certainly the religious model, the spiritual care model. They are miles apart, it feels like sometimes. And while the pop spirituality writers are really great, I mean, engaging and wonderful, and they have brought up these conversations about how we make meaning in our lives, they don't have the sort of day-to-day, in-and-out experience with sickness and death that hospice chaplains have, or hospital chaplains for that matter, right? They don't have that depth of experiential knowledge. They just simply don't. And so my encouragement to all of you is that individually, professionally, culturally, we need to wrestle with that. We need to wrestle with why chaplaincy is absent for the most part from this conversation. Because we are. I've been out in the world, right, for the past 2 years. Sometimes I haven't really wanted to be out there, right? Sometimes I would much rather be with a patient in their bedroom, you know, in a cozy little visit, you know, where the whole world drops away and there's just a spotlight on their beautiful faces. I have longed for that intimacy. I have missed it. It's a good place to be, right? If that's where you're called, there is no better place to be. But I haven't been in that space for a couple years now, for the writing and then the speaking over the past year and a half. I've been sort of out in the world among people who are not chaplains, people who are not ministers, people who are not nurses, not doctors, not social workers. I've been out there. And I will tell you that chaplaincy is not. We are not. And the question needs to be, why not? Why not? We certainly have the education. We certainly have the experience. We come from rich religious backgrounds of incredible, beautiful writing. A lot of us are pastors, priests, rabbis. We know how to speak publicly. We're not afraid of it. And yet, we aren't there. Part of this may be because it's hard. I don't deny this. It's difficult to be so out in the open. It's very difficult, very uncomfortable at times. 2 weeks ago, I was at a book festival, and I was supposed to talk about my book on living, which is about hospice chaplaincy, in conversation with another writer. And she had written a book about her diagnosis. She was in her 30s, and she had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And she had written a book about this. And I was going to be this is a book thing they do, like book festivals. You're in conversation. You're going to talk about your books with each other. But I had a sneaking suspicion it might not happen that way. So I called my chaplain, Amani Brown, Lagonier. She's married now. She's been married for like 20 years, but she's still Amani Brown to me. And I called her, and we talked it through, and we understood. She helped me understand it might not go that way. And so I walked into this conversation. Remember, we're on stage. There's about 800 people in a big theater watching this. I knew this might happen, and yet, when it happened, and what happened was, we did not talk about our books. Well, I tried. I tried for like the first conversation, the first question. We talked about her diagnosis, right? That's what we ended up talking about in public. And it felt very vulnerable. It felt a little bit exploitative, like exploitation. It was really uncomfortable. And I just kept thinking, you know how to do this, right? You know how to do this, as uncomfortable as it was for me. When I got off the stage, everyone clapped, they all stood up. Apparently the audience loved it. I didn't love it. I go back through the curtains. It's very, very dark. I walk out into the hallway. And standing there was a girl I did CPE with when I was still at Harvard, named Liz Hacken. And I didn't know she was going to be there. I hadn't seen her probably 15 years. And I just walked over to her, and I just hung on her. I just walked over, and she put her arms around me, and she said, "That was really good. You did good." It didn't feel good. And afterwards, one person came up to me afterwards, and she was an Episcopal priest, and she said, "That was a really beautiful example of pastoral care. You modeled that really well. You modeled what you talk about in the book really, really well, because that woman was in a lot of anguish." She's the only one who said that. Everybody else said, "That was beautiful. That was wonderful. That was amazing. I've never seen a conversation like that before. That was the best thing I've ever seen at this conference. I've never seen that before. That was crazy, that conversation you had." Right? It wasn't crazy. It was a pastoral care conversation, right? That's what it was. But for people seeing it, as uncomfortable as it was for me to do, for people seeing it, they did not feel uncomfortable, as I felt, and they did not feel anguished, as the woman I spoke with felt. They felt hopeful. They felt it was beautiful. They felt it was comforting. They said, "I wish I could have conversations like that. I wish people talked like that more. They couldn't put their finger on what they saw, right? They didn't have the language or the training to know what they just saw, except for that one Episcopal priest. And then I got several emails from people who were either chaplains or pastors or priests who had had CPE training. And they said the same thing. "Wow, you really modeled that really well. That was good. It was good." The vast majority of people, though, simply knew they wanted more of it. They didn't know what it was, but they knew that they were lacking it in their lives. And they knew that the lack of it was painful, and that for even 1 hour to get to see that filled them up. So there's a hunger in the world for what all of you do. You're CPE supervisors. You know how to teach people how to do this. I don't know how to do that. I know how to be in a conversation with someone. I know how to be present, right? That's what I can do. I can be present. But you have a gift. You have a gift the world is hungering for. The world needs to talk about it. The world needs to think about it. And the world, again, because I've been out there, right? I have gotten the emails, thousands of emails. Well, mostly Facebook messages, which I lose. Facebook has like 7 layers of spam, which I feel terrible about because people send me messages. And if you have all sent me, any of you have sent me a message and I haven't replied, I will. I promise you I will. But the sheer volume of it has been a little bit overwhelming. The sheer need that is out there in the world has been surprising to me. It has been surprising to me. Now, I don't really know what all of you can do to meet that need. That's not my message today. The message I am conveying is simply that it exists, and that you all have a very particular and hard-won skill set to meet that need, but to teach the larger culture as well how to be with each other, how to be present, how to not be distracted, how to not need to fix something, how to not be afraid of someone who is sick, of someone who is dying, how to model what love in action looks like. You know how to do that. You know how to teach people how to do that. And so my message to you is to think about how you get out into the world, not just with your CPE students or in that beautiful intimacy of a hospital room, and not doing all the paperwork that you do that makes the world go round. And people have said to me, several people have said, I was going to write a book about being a chaplain, but I don't have to now because you already did it. And that's a cop-out. That's quite simply not true. Because if I can name 10 books by doctors off the top of my head, I think there's room for more than one book by a chaplain. I think there's a lot of room in this world for what all of you have and what all of you know and what all of you do. And sometimes it is easier to keep it close to our hearts. But I think there is a yawning need. I think all the time when I'm invited to speak to groups, I think all the time of Jim and Elaine. And I think of that idea of a message from the Holy Spirit, that some of us are tasked with spreading a message. And if I ever doubted that Jim and Elaine, Jim particularly, had this message to get out to the Holy Spirit, I mean, come on, those coincidences, come on. There's got to be something there, right? There's got to be something there. The Pope? Come on. If I ever doubted, I am a true believer now. But I think about Jim and Elaine's messages. And Jim's message, I'll repeat it again. I'll repeat it till the day I die. I will repeat it over and over again as many times as I can. Jim's message was that the love is stronger than the sickness, and it's stronger than the death. And that sickness and dying do not destroy a person. They change a person, but it is not destruction. But Elaine's message, we know that. We know Jim's message. But Elaine's message is that we have to tell that over and over and over and over again. Because sometimes, even when it's right in front of us, we don't know it and we don't see it. Thank you.